All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is X-linked traits, right? So anything that's not on the sex chromosomes, which is X and Y, would be called an autosomal trait. Autosomes are the first 22 chromosomes, chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth through 22. These are the ones that are basically homologous pairs or very similar from mom and dad. Same exact genes, maybe different alleles, homologous pairs, right? But we also have the sex chromosome. So in many species, males and females have different pairs of sex chromosomes, right? So if you're female, you are XX for humans, and if you're male, you are XY, right? And this makes the genes that are on either the X or the very few that are on the Y chromosome makes them a little bit unique because you don't necessarily have two copies of them if you are male. If you're female, you have two X chromosomes. You have two copies of each gene. But if you're male, you are XY. And so if a gene is on the X chromosome, you are only going to have one copy of that because you only have one X chromosome as a male. The other chromosome is Y, right? And so the Y chromosome really doesn't do much. There's barely any genes left on it. There's a couple of genes that basically lead to a cascade of developmental events that give you male genitalia that make you develop as a male. However, on the X chromosome, there's all kinds of genes, lots of genes. This is a very large chromosome, and lots of genes, many of which don't really have anything to do with making you male or female. They just happen to reside or live on the X chromosome, including things that can cause color blindness, hemophilia, various diseases that are caused if there's mutations in those genes, because these are important genes beyond just making you female. But remember, the reason the sex chromosome is different is because if you're female, you are XX, you have two copies. If you're male, you are XY, you only have one copy of the genes on the X. Okay? And this makes the inheritance or the probabilities we need to think about with regards to those genes, if they are X-linked, meaning they're on the X chromosome, makes that a little bit unique. So we have to think about them a little differently than we did all the autosomal genes, where we definitely have two copies of each gene, maybe different alleles, but two copies of each gene because we're diploid. And that's true regardless of if you're male or female on all of the other autosomal chromosomes, but not necessarily true on the X chromosome. Right? So if we take a look at this, let's think about this a little bit. So we'll think about this with regards to color blindness. So the genes that allow your photoreceptors, which are the cells at the back of the eye that absorb light, that allow them to make different photoreceptors that absorb blue or green or red. We have three different types of photoreceptors. And if you've ever kind of done a BGR blue, green, red color palette, different combinations of those can pretty much give you the whole spectrum of the rainbow. This is the basis for a lot of different computer screens and things like that, at least in the past, right? So the retinal cone photoreceptor cells contain blue cones, green cones, and red cones. Okay? So what number do you see here? Well, if you see an 8, then you are not colorblind. If you see a 3, then you are partially colorblind because that means the lighter orange here is blending in with the green. If you are asking what number at all, then that's because you might be red-green colorblind, and a red-green colorblind person cannot differentiate between red and green, and they all kind of blend together the same. And the reason for that is a red-green colorblind person doesn't have individual cones for red or green. They all kind of blend together. And that's a chromosomal allele that would be on the X chromosome. Right? So red-green color blindness affects approximately 5 to 8% of males, but it's very rare in females. Why do you think that might be? Well, red-green color blindness is recessive, meaning all you need is at least one normal allele that gives you red and green cones to be normal. So you can be, if you are a female, you can be a carrier because you have two chances to get it right. If you're a female, you have two X chromosomes, meaning you have two chances to get it right. But if you're male, how many chances do you have to get it right? Since you're male, you are XY, that means you only have one chance to get it right. So males cannot be carriers for the color blindness gene. If you get colorblind allele from mom, you are going to be colorblind because from dad you got the Y allele, right? So anything that is X-linked is going to be a lot more frequent in males and a lot more rare in females, because females have 2 chances to get it right if it's recessive X-linked gene. Males only have 1 chance to get it right because we're not XX, we are XY. Right? So when we are doing red-green color blindness, what this means is we now have to not only define the allele, we also have to define if you're getting the X or the Y chromosome, because that's part of this trait. So anything that is X-linked, you now have to define the X or the Y as well. And so what we'll usually end up with is different alleles. So if we're going to talk about these alleles, we'll talk about them this way. All right, so the way I usually define it is X, because you're getting the X chromosome. So if I do X plus, that's going to be normal. Terrible, but anyway, XC in this case. All right, so XC would be our colorblind. I'm just going to put CB for colorblind allele. And then, obviously, you can also get the Y chromosome from Dad. All right, so these are our 3 potential alleles. And there's 3 now because you have to take into account, are you getting the X chromosome? And if so, is it the wild type normal color allele or the colorblind allele and so forth? And this would be the case for any X-linked trait. So if it's not X-linked, all you need to do is define the allele. So big A might be albino or normal pigment, and little a albino. Or big R might be for rolling your tongue, little r for not being able to roll your tongue. Since they're on the autosomal chromosomes, not the X chromosome, you don't have to define the XY. But anything on the X chromosome, you now have to define these, because you have these possibilities. You can have the X with the normal allele, the X with, in this case, the colorblind allele, or you can get Y, your dad. Right? And so that's what you need to remember when you're defining the gamete possibilities. So let's see what this would be the case. What would be the case for a normal father, so not colorblind, and a carrier mother. Okay. So see if you can go ahead, pause the video, do the Punnett square. There's definitely going to be something like this on the celebration of learning at the end. All right. So if this is a normal father, a carrier mother, so normal father is not colorblind, but it is father, so it has to be XY. So it would have the normal X plus color allele and Y. But a carrier mother would be X plus XC. So this person, this mom, would still be able to see normal colors, but she is a carrier. She's heterozygous. And so now if you fill out that Punnett square, these are your possibilities. So we basically have a 50-50 chance of being female or male, right? If you are female, you have 0% chance of being colorblind. If you are male, you have a 50% chance of being colorblind. Now, of all the children, only 1 out of 4 has a chance of being colorblind. But that 1 out of 4 is a half a chance if you're male and 0 chance if you're female. So we start to put these things together, and the genotype and the phenotypes are a little bit different. This female here would be a carrier. This female would be homozygous normal. This male would be normal color vision, and this male would be colorblind. Right, so now let's think about a colorblind father and a normal non-carrier, just homozygous for normal color vision mother. So go ahead and fill out that Punnett square. What would be the probabilities of having a male who is colorblind? What would be the probability of having a female child who's colorblind? What would be the probability of having a female child who is a carrier? All right, so let's look at this together. So here's my colorblind dad, right? So the X chromosome had to have the colorblind allele, XCY, and mom was normal for normal color vision, homozygous. And if we fill that out, this is our Punnett square. Right, so filling out the Punnett square is pretty normal. Really, we just need to remember we're having to include the X versus the Y chromosome for these X-linked traits. So if we take a look at this, we can see that there is a 0 chance of a male being colorblind, and actually a 0 chance of a female being colorblind. But there's a 100% chance of the daughter being a carrier. And why is that? Why do you think there's a 100% chance of the daughter being a carrier if her dad was colorblind? Well, if it's a daughter, that means she had to get the X chromosome from dad, because if she had gotten the Y chromosome from dad, she would be a male. Right? So if it's a daughter, she had to get the X chromosome from dad. And if dad is colorblind, that means his only X chromosome is the colorblind allele. And so she had to inherit the X colorblind allele from dad if he is colorblind, therefore guaranteeing her that she will be a carrier. So if you are a female with normal color vision and your dad is colorblind, you know for sure that you must be a carrier. Last one here. So go ahead and fill out this Punnett square. Now for a colorblind father and a carrier mother. Now, what is the probability of having any child, male or female, that is colorblind? All right, what's the probability of having a male child that's colorblind? What's the probability of having a female child, a daughter, that's colorblind? Well, let's take a look here. So here is our parent genotypes: colorblind father, XCY, a carrier mother, XCX plus, doesn't matter which order you put these in, but there needs to be an X plus and an XC. Now if you fill these out, this daughter would actually be colorblind because she got the colorblind allele from dad and a colorblind allele from mom. This son would be colorblind, this daughter would be a carrier, and this son would be completely normal color vision. All right. So basically, there's a 50-50 chance of a child being colorblind, whether it's male or female in this case. So females can get the X-linked trait, in this case colorblindness. It's just more rare because the female, the daughter, has 2 chances of getting a normal X chromosome, whereas males only have 1 chance. Why are X-linked traits never transmitted from a father to his son? Well, let's think about that. If it's a son, what chromosome did he have to get from his dad? Well, if it's a son, he had to get the Y chromosome from his dad. X-linked traits can never be transmitted from a father to his son, because if a father passed down his X chromosome to his son wouldn't be his son would be his daughter. Right? If the father passes on the X chromosome, then that child would be a daughter because she obviously has to get an X chromosome from mom. Mom's XX. Right? And so if dad passes on an X chromosome, that's going to be a daughter. If the dad passes on a Y chromosome, that's his son. So a dad can never pass on an X-linked trait to his son because he has to give his son the Y chromosome. Right? But we also know that if dad does have an X-linked trait, the daughter is guaranteed to at least be a carrier because she had to get that X chromosome from dad. Right? So why can't dad give his son an X-linked trait? Why does the X-linked trait for a son always have to come from mom? Because the only X chromosome the son has had to come from mom. Dad had to give his son a Y, because if dad gave his kid an X, that kid is his daughter. All right. That's it for this.